Hey, real quick, before we get into that episode, do us a favor and subscribe to our channel. That way you don't miss out on any marketing nuggets. Enjoy the show.
There are times where you need a leader to realize we are in a crisis and I'm just going to tell you what to do right now. You must comply because the house literally is on fire.
Yeah.
Generally, the coercive approach has a terrible impact on climate, or like organizational
culture
climate.
and the-
Terrible.
Hi, I'm Josh Owen. As the owner of a video marketing company in New Orleans, I've been on the quest to learn everything I can about marketing. Everyone has a different style, different strategy, and a different experience. Is there a wrong way to do it? A right way to do it? Let's find out together as we make marketing make sense. Welcome back, everybody, to another episode of Make Marketing Make Sense. I'm here, joined by the illustrious, fantastic, wonderful, most magnanimous Josh Densen, CEO of Next Chapter. Thanks for joining me, man.
It's my pleasure to be here.
Yeah. Well, I feel like at Next Chapter, you know a little bit about what our topic is about today. Leadership.
Yeah.
You know something about that?
We do a lot of leadership development at Next Chapter. Yeah.
Nice. Well, break it down for me. I mean, how does leadership get cultivated in an organization?
Oh, that's good. Well, first of all, this is really fun.
Yeah.
I have listened to and watched a lot of your shows.
Really?
Wow.
Yeah. Oh, we got all right. Okay, look at this.
First time, long time.
Yeah, first time, long time. I love that. You come in and then rocking it out.
And so it's really a thrill to be here. You're
Yeah.
a great podcast host.
Oh my
It's really
gosh!
fun.
Wow. Listen, I didn't pay you or
Yeah,
anything.
you call me
so-
illustrious or whatever. So leadership. The most important thing that I think about when I think about leadership in organizations is that I would say there's two things. Number one, leadership is not reserved for the person who's the leader. There is no the leader. There's an executive. There's different positions. Like there may be a manager or a lot of managers, but everyone can be a leader. Everyone is a leader if they choose to be a leader. And it's actually incumbent upon every person in a healthy, high-functioning, high-performing organization to take on leadership roles.
Yeah.
That is like just number one. And then number two, as we look at leadership in organizations, it's important to remember that leadership itself is a skill. Oftentimes we erroneously believe that leadership is something you're like born with, or we confuse it with charisma or being able to communicate well. There's lots of all that can factor in, but ultimately, leadership's a skill, and it's a skill that, and like any skill, it can be developed. There are people that have, a greater propensity for it and greater aptitude for it. For sure, it comes more naturally to some and less naturally for others. But then there's also a variety of versions and lots of different styles, and so everyone can be a leader, and everyone needs to be a leader if you want to have a really healthy organization. And B, leadership is a skill that can be developed. And so if you understand those two things and you instill those as organizational values or even believe them yourself, oftentimes this is about you believing that kind of story, then it can have a dramatic effect on the culture, on the performance, and just the general feel of your organization and the way you approach your work in the world.
Yeah. I mean, something that I feel like, I don't know, it's this is going to be the whole new thing. For so long, organizations are hiring, or a lot of organizations like to hire up within. They like to hire up, and the aptitude for it seems to be how good are you at the job, not how good are you at being a leader. So then they hire they push this person up, they promote them in a position, and they haven't taught them any of these. They almost don't recognize that leadership is a part of the organization.
Yeah. So that's a real problem. It's a very common challenge and struggle for entrepreneurs, for leaders of young, growing organizations, kind of earlier in their life cycle, when you're successful and you're growing, and you have usually a small team at the beginning, and oftentimes the people that are a part of that team are really, really valuable because they like embody the culture. That's fantastic. And they typically have like great skills for the jobs they were brought in for. But as you grow, their responsibilities often change as the like scale or the needs or the product mix of the company or organization changes, and suddenly what was a strength for them in their prior position is gone, and they're now responsible for all new things, including the leadership and management of other people. And so it could be often that organizations are really very good at training up on the skills, like the skills of that new job, even like the management like approach, but where they oftentimes overlook or take for granted is this idea of like, no, we have to be, we have to act as leaders. What does that mean to be a leader? A, the organization needs to define what that means for themselves, and then B, they have to apply that framework or that definition to the individuals in positions of influence and power. And so often all this is just, if it's even considered, it's like considered at a very high surface level, and it's often not considered at all. But I believe it's got to be, in my experience as an entrepreneur, as an organizational leader, you need to be just as deliberate about leadership development as you are about any other skill development.
Probably the most important, I feel like.
Yeah, because it's adaptive and it's always changing. And because if you're going to be I think just a good, effective leader, you're like in connection with other humans, and humans are like dynamic, emotional, uncertain. Like we're always growing and changing and learning. And so if you're going to invest in leadership development, you've got to know how to like ride those waves, hear those signals, and like really react in a way and respond in a way that's like real, human, authentic, all that stuff.
Yeah. And I think, and you were talking about a little bit in there, and I'm also curious about this because you were mentioning like how, when you start training people on being leaders, how do you kind of coach people through the ideas of, because when you are a leader, it's not like you're just dealing with one person. You could be dealing with multiple people. And there's such a diversity in the ideas that you're having to be fed, the ways you're supposed to kind of manage people. How do you kind of coach people through dealing with that diversity of people that they're managing?
So there's a variety of points there around diversity as it relates to leadership and management. The first, I want to talk about like the diversity of leadership itself, and then we can talk about the importance of diversity of teams and that. So first off, when I talk leadership, I think it's very important that we remember that there's a variety of approaches and styles, and there is not, I don't believe, any one style for one person all the time. There's a very famous researcher out of Harvard, Daniel Goleman. He kind of invented emotional intelligence. He didn't invent emotional intelligence. He kind of organized this
the ideas around it. Yeah.
And he published a great article in HBR. This is now maybe 20 plus years ago on 6 different leadership styles. And it looked at like the coaching leadership style and the democratic leadership style and the affiliative, pace setting, authoritative, and coercive. And each one of them has a very different impact on the organizational climate, and each one of them is situational and has its time and place. There are times where you actually, it's appropriate.
It's like adaptive.
It got to be adaptive. You got to be situational. Like there are times where you need a leader to realize we are in a crisis, and I'm just going to tell you what to do right now. You must comply because the house literally is on fire. Right. That approach is not. It generally, the coercive approach has a terrible impact on climate, like organizational
the culture
climate.
And
terrible. It's I think the lowest rated one of all of this, with pace setting actually not too far behind. But it can be appropriate. Now, if you did that, if you took that approach in a traditional organizational time where you're like kind of in midstream of a project, it would have a terrible impact on culture. But if you took that approach in a time of a crisis, it's exactly what's needed. So you've got to be very in tune to the diversity of leadership itself.
Yeah, and you have to know what you have in your tool belt. It's like a tool belt. You got to have it.
It's a tool belt. You've got to know what the situation calls for. You have to also have the level of self-awareness to know where your styles, your comfort levels are, and what your tendencies are. And then you've got to like be aware of that and recognize that a particular situation, a particular person, a particular environment may call for a different approach to leadership. And you have to know, is that in my wheelhouse? Is that a stretch for me? All that stuff. So that takes a lot of self-awareness, a lot of emotional intelligence, and it really points to the diversity of leadership you're talking about. Now, on the team side of things, having a diversity in your team, a diversity of perspectives, of identities, of life experience, all of that I think is wonderful. It is a great asset, largely because it allows you to be creative problem solvers. It allows you to have a variety of opinions, hopefully some good, healthy conflict, and ultimately, if done successfully and effectively, you can end up with an even better and more creative solution at the end than you would have had if it was all homogeneous or even like had very low levels of diversity in terms of opinions and identities and life experience.
Well, this is something I'm intrigued by that you're bringing to my head, and I'm curious because a lot of what we're talking about here is this kind of notion that, and I think in large part, most organizations just don't realize, one, like what the first point you mentioned, it's a skill. But I'm curious, from your perspective and your experience, is it possible for people to become effective leaders on their own, or is it the way to get there with someone with guidance? Like what? I guess like I guess everything could be possible, but like how much more effective is it to have guidance in becoming a leader?
So I'm sure that there are people that are excellent leaders who are born that way, and they don't ever have to, and they can like use effective approaches of like reflection and to build their own self-awareness and generate insight from other people around them. I'm sure that can happen. But oftentimes there are many things that just only working on our own will limit our own insight into ourselves.
Right.
And
so 100%,
having a coach, having a trusted peer, trusted advisor, a thought partner, a thinking partner can very much deepen and accelerate that development, and will, I think, has a multiplicative effect on your own awareness and insight into who you are and how you need to grow. So in that sense, I don't know that anyone needs a coach.
Right.
Sure. But I do think that having a coach can accelerate your own development.
And it's like, and for businesses, that should be a no-brainer. Like the time is money. And,
time is money, sure.
And and for a lot of business, that's the bottom line. Is like we want these things to happen faster.
And to that point on the connection between time and money, and leadership. Yeah. Oftentimes people think that leadership coaching or executive coaching is a luxury that we can't afford. Yeah. Because it does feel, it can come across as like, we sit here and like we talk like I don't want a therapist. It's like or if I want a therapist, I'll get a therapist. Yeah. Coaching is not therapy. We can talk about the difference between coaching and therapy and mentoring. These are very different things. They're related and adjacent, but they're very different things. Right. And ultimately, I think that the investment that you have in a leader, in an employee, the investment in their development returns so much more than if you try to save money by not investing in them.
Yeah.
It's a great. I'm sure I'm going to mess this up.
Oh,
but
all right.
Get
all right.
ready.
Everybody, get out your
Get-
Google and get ready to test.
It's something like we can't afford to invest all this money. This is in an organization where they're having to make real tough decisions on professional development, investing money, and a skeptic says, how are we affording to invest all this money in our employees' professional development? What happens if we invest all this money in them and then they leave? Then that's and the right response to that, like from the the visionary executive, is what happens if we don't invest this money in them and they stay?
Yeah.
Right. So then it's like, what would you rather? I would so much rather, and as a leader, when I was like leading organizations, I was so focused on developing our people and developing our organization. And so long as these two entities, these two parties, are developing in the same way that like reinforces their own growth and development, that's great. And if at any point those two lines begin to separate, that's fine. Go grow and develop in a way that makes sense for you, organizations, or in a way that makes sense for you, individual. Does that make sense?
Awesome. Yeah. Because I think my thing is this, and what you're saying is like with the adjacency of what you were talking about is with leadership.
Yeah.
It's kind of like my question about that, going even further than that, is what are the tangibles? Like, because it's kind of like the problem is like there's such an epidemic, so many things you can link to. Well, man, that was bad leadership, and it's like what are the tangibles that you point to? Because it's like because it's kind of intangible in a sense, because this thing failed because there wasn't good leadership. But it's like you can't really see necessarily and that's what I would love to hear. What do you say to that as far as like what the tangibles are of like having poor leadership?
There's a few things there in what you're saying. So, I think I believe this. Let me.
Okay.
But I actually think that.
Come back next week and we'll see how it is.
Yeah. Read the comments. I'll see if I agree with it. No, but in a way, we can't. I don't know. I don't necessarily think we can always equate the failure, the failure of an initiative or of a venture or something, with like that's evidence that the leadership was bad. Sometimes the strategy was bad. Sometimes the execution was bad. Sometimes there's lots of other reasons why things fail. And things just fail sometimes. Sometimes the time is not right, the environment, the competitive landscape. All these things factor in to like I was leading an organization that was working to do in-person educational experiences with kids in high school and middle school and their teachers and administrators. And this global organization, we were launching like really big launch in all of North America. And I started there in January of 2020. And our programming was fantastic for in-person experiences at school. And it was like good, like intersection of like identity work and like society and how to be a responsible, engaged citizen. We were not ready for COVID at all. At all. We tried to pivot. We tried to make things. We tried to adjust to the environment. But ultimately, that entry into the North American market failed. And I was the like local leader at that time, and it failed. And I don't look back on that time like, oh, I was a bad leader, or it failed because I was a bad leader. Not necessarily at all. I think that failed for a variety of reasons, like I'm saying. But it's not necessary. I don't think leadership is like can be. There's not a direct line between the success or failure of an initiative, a product, an organization, always, with that means leadership was good or leadership was bad. There's plenty of time where you had terrible leadership in a very successful company, and times where you have a company that fails and the leadership was excellent. I think it's not the case that that's a double negative. Organizational culture is a direct line to leadership, I believe. The success of the product or the program or whatever, that is open to so many other factors. But the organizational culture, that's not entirely, but that is led by the leader of the organization and reinforced by the leaders in the organization that are throughout it.
Right. And I guess like when you're talking to other organizations, what is the way that you put that forth to them to say like why it's so imperative? Because that's what what I'm trying to get at here too.
Where are you going?
Is like it's intangible, right? But there is some level of obviously there's something that we can point to, you know?
Yeah.
And so when you're pointing at it, like what are you telling them is like the stakes?
So that's great. So when I work with leaders within organizations, like not leaders at the top of organizations, that's a different approach. But oftentimes I'm talking to executives about wanting to develop their like mid-level leaders.
Yeah.
Often an overlooked group of people.
Definitely.
In organizations, but often like the most critical to organizational change, to organizational effectiveness, and to organizational culture. What I tell them is, or I generally get at the idea that you're focusing on the skills, on the KPIs, on the outputs, but who's focusing on their like emotional intelligence development, their self-awareness, their ability to give and receive like feedback, like their ability to connect and to show their employees that they care. Like all those things are oftentimes the difference between achieving and not achieving a KPI, and they're often overlooked in organizational growth and development by particularly like mission-driven organizations because resources are typically tight, and they're trying to really cram a lot into very little amount of time in the week and such. So that's where having an outside support where you just focus on an individual's like leadership development is very, very valuable because oftentimes I'm working in organizations and in industries where I have no experience. I am not an expert in global health, like at all. But leadership and the way a person is aware of who they are, how they come across, the decisions that they have to make, how they make those decisions, how they solve problems, how they approach conflict. All of those things are kind of universal and don't need like the company, the organization, the agency can focus on the skill development of that's particular to their business or their industry. It's helpful to have somebody who is ignorant of those things to focus on just the like who you are as a human, who you are as a leader,
and how you interact with the other humans that are around.
That's right.
Yeah,
that's right.
That's awesome. Well, okay. So last thing, because this has all been really like I think eye-opening in the sense that I feel like a lot of people are just kind of skipping the it's like I forgot I need to deal with that. Is if you were to give and take your time if you need to think about this, but if you were to give a tip to businesses, something that a practice they could kind of implement within their leadership organizational structure, what tip would you give them?
I think it's because you isolated one tip. That's really tough. So I'm like trying to find a through line for all of this. But I think if organizations and leaders in particular can tap into and be honest about like what their like life view is, like what they really think we're here to do in life, truly, and and hold that, and also have a sense of like what we're like what our like view is on work broadly, and our view is on work in this group of people that is organized to do this thing together, and then look for coherence among those things. So incorporating your like literally like, why are we here? Like, why do we exist? Why do I work at all? And why do I work at this place? And look for coherence among all of those things. That begins that I operate from a place where like, if that exists in an organization, or if that exists in a person, I want to be closer to that person. I want to be closer to that organization. I want to follow, like we talk about leading, like I want to follow that space.
Yeah.
Cause it feels good. It feels, there's something life forcey about it where it's just
almost,
like, this is
because
awesome.
like the way you describe it to me, it almost feels like being able to achieve that, it gives attainability. Like it feels like relatability, attainability. Like it feels like people looking to the leader that has these things, these qualities about them. You can look at them and kind of feel a sense of understanding quickly.
Yeah. We also realize that you don't have it figured out. Like you're not like this idea of coherence between like why we're here in life and why we work at all and why we work at this place. That's going to be, because we were talking about earlier, all filled with humans, and that's going to be dynamic and changing and growing. And so that's an ongoing learning process. But like, that's like, we don't like, if you're on autopilot and you're like you're like gunning through your career, you're just like trying to get to Friday in your day, like that is kind of like soul sucking and like not fun and ultimately like nihilistic. It just, there's no there.
Yeah.
But if you interact with, or you're a part of a culture where you're like connected, you have found coherence between why we are here in the first place or in any place, why we work at all, and why we work at this place, and you're constantly trying to like churn that coherence, that's magical.
Yeah. You just described a house of cards versus a brick house.
Yeah. I dig that.
Yeah. That's great.
Yeah.
Man, I mean, like there's so much more I want to dive into, but we only had so much time. So I feel like the best thing I can do now is all the people listening that really are, engaged by this idea of tapping into leadership and developing it. Where can they find you so that they can get started on that journey?
Wow. Thank you. My company's name is Next Chapter. Our URL is nextchapter.co, just C-O. I'm also on LinkedIn. And you can find me, Josh Densen, D-E-N-S-E-N, not
that's
S-O-N. Right. And that's that.
Double E. Josh with a double E.
Double Joshes.
Double Joshes, double E's. That's how we do it. Well, you guys check out Josh Densen, Next Chapter, and we'll see you all on the next one. Thanks for joining me, man.
My pleasure. High five.
Thanks for tuning into the show. If you haven't already, go ahead and hit that subscribe button. This episode of Make Marketing Make Sense is brought to you by Comfystone. If your business needs organic social media video content, video ads, or video podcasting, hit up Comfystone at comfystone.com and follow Comfystone on Instagram and TikTok. Until next time, this is Make Marketing Make Sense.